Hey.
Hello. First of all, I love your shirt, by the way. I really like that tie
Oh,
dye. But
thanks.
but so how are you? What is going on?
How am I? Well, the answer would now finally be it's getting better. It has
Okay,
been
good.
a brutally rough ride.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, the first 2 weeks were fine. Mostly. I mean, I was, felt a little off. I moved in
Mm,
here and I don't remember what happened. I wish I had uh, written about it in my journal because it might be useful to know exactly what it was that set it off. But something set off the whole thing about my being uh, abandoned and rejected by my family, in particular, my mom
yeah.
and my younger sister.
Yeah.
And, I started dealing with that stuff back in 2020, and it came up when I was getting help with it. There's a woman I knew through POK who's a psychologist, retired, and another person who's a therapist, and they were part of this support group. No one was showing up to the support group but me, so I was getting free help for
Wow.
like 6 months from these two
That's
people.
amazing.
And
Yeah, yeah.
and we worked through, opened that stuff up and started to get into it. But what I didn't realize until now was that there was a lot of really intense feeling. I mean, deep, intense, very heavy feeling that had never been felt.
Yeah.
I think about when I was dumped in East Texas when my mom arranged to have me put in that boys' home out there.
Yeah.
I can remember watching my mom and my dad and my younger sister drive off, and I couldn't cry. I couldn't get upset. I was in this
Right.
strange place with like 15 other guys around my age and three
Yeah.
counselors, and you know, no 13-year-old guy is going to, more than likely. I mean, I'm sure there are exceptions, but most are not going to freely cry in a place where you cannot have any privacy at all. So it just
Yeah.
got held in. So
Yeah.
that hit me out of nowhere and it hit me hard. And I was feeling it. It was coming up and like, I don't know, I knew what it was. I figured it out after some point in time. I don't know when. I don't know how quickly I figured it out. But even before then, I was just feeling it. I was like, okay, a feeling's coming up. I'm not going to analyze it. I'm not going to try to do anything to it or with it. I'm just going to feel it. I'm just going to let it be and let it come up. And then finally, I figured out what was going on, that this was all that stuff that had never been felt over being sent to East Texas, my mom conspiring to have me put in juvenile hall, being pushed out another time to another boys' home, and, all the various things my mom did that
Yeah.
you kind of need the opposite of that from a mother. Um, uh,
Absolutely.
so anyway, all of that's going on. Um, and and my the emotions are still very close to the surface. It's not as bad as it was, and when I say bad, I don't mean to
Yeah.
judge
No.
as bad or wrong, because I that's actually one of the things that became clear about a month ago was that don't even though I was feeling it and letting it come up, I was still there was still this subtle view that I wasn't quite aware of at first, that this is something that's unpleasant, uncomfortable, something I'd rather avoid. And when I realized that was there, that was active, I realized it was a case of, okay, total openness. We're just going to
Yeah.
give this free run to come up when it comes up. If I'm in a place where I
Amazing.
can cry and let it all out, I'll cry and let it all out.
Yep.
I'm it's just going to have to run its course, and I'm going to give it as much time as it needs. And we're still in
Yeah.
that time period, but there's none of that subtle resistance. So while all of this is going on, something else you should know is everything is okay with Susanna and I, and it
Okay,
has been
good.
all along. This is not about
Yep.
Susanna and I.
Yep.
The decision I made, I can't remember if I told you, was because Susanna and I were talking one day, and she mentioned that Susanna or that Tuesday was still on about the whole thing about why didn't you protect me from him?
Yeah.
And Susanna doesn't know what to say because I'm not hitting her, I'm not
Right.
calling her names, I'm not emotionally, psychologically, verbally abusing her. I've never laid a hand on her, so protect her from what? Susanna's really confused and she's upset because she doesn't know what to do. She feels stuck in the middle. And
Yeah.
so when we were talking about it, I said, you know what? I'll tell you what, let me leave. I'm just going to go stay with Nicole. I'll talk to Nicole about this. Let me go stay somewhere else for however long.
Yeah.
And she didn't want that, but she said, okay, I understand why, and I think you're probably right. And after a couple of days, and it's interesting that neither one of us said this to the other person until right before I was getting ready to finally move out. Because I said something about, well, I don't have to go, and I'd already had this sense, but I didn't say it to her. And Susanna said to me, I have a feeling that my feeling is this needs to happen, that
Mm.
this is something that has to happen. This is part of a process that will allow things to change and for you and I to be able to have our life as a couple without having to be constantly consumed with parenting and have to constantly talk about parenting and have to constantly deal with this stuff. So I think it's better that you go. And I said, well, it's funny. I had the same feeling. I had a feeling that this had to happen, that this was going back to what I said a little bit, a few minutes ago, that there seems to be this quality of intelligence in life, and it
Yeah.
will direct things where they need to go for things to
Yeah.
happen. And it felt like that. It felt like, there was something bigger, something more intelligent that was make me pushing things to happen this way. And so I went ahead and went through with it, and it got so bad. I got to such a dark place
Mm.
that I remember sitting here one day and all of these thoughts just started up. I mean, thoughts about taking my own life. And
Mm.
the shocking thing was, uh, all of a sudden I realized that, okay, so there's one part of the mind that's thinking the thoughts, there's this other part of the
Yeah.
mind that's watching, and the part that's watching is going, yeah, yeah. And then another part turned on and went, what? What? That makes sense.
Yeah.
That sounds
Yeah.
feasible. And I
Complete.
snapped out of it. I snapped
Yeah.
out of it. But I was
Amazing.
so startled by the fact that one part was describing all of these possibilities, and another part was it was in agreement. I mean,
Yeah.
and it really shocked me that, okay, enough's enough.
Yep.
Something has got to be done. Then I started going back through videos with you. Anytime I was in the car, I get notifications for videos from Pernilla, which are almost always, the short ones, anywhere
Yeah.
from a couple of minutes to maybe 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And so I'll listen to those while I'm driving. If it's a really long drive, I'll put on one of the conversations between you and I. I started writing stuff out, not only what was going on, just to kind of be clear, what was happening, and
Yeah.
to make sure that I was any patterns that might be at work, that I was putting them on paper so they could be seen, but also,
Yep.
stuff would pop up from in the previous conversations between you and I, and anytime something came up that was something that is this is useful. I can use this in a pinch. Like for instance, one of the things you at one point in time you said, um, and this is a reduced or
Mm.
concentrated version of it, but the shorthand version of it, where there's a reaction, wake up, pay attention, watch for the
Mhm.
story that's about to begin, recognize the
Yep.
sensations and be with them in the moment.
Yep.
Ask, is this true? Do you believe
Yep.
this? Is there buy-in? And
Yeah.
I look at that every day, and I make
Amazing.
sure that I get that in, and I'm trying to remind myself when there's a reaction, okay, that, remember that,
Yep.
use that when there's a reaction in the moment. Um, there are other things too that I've written down. Try not to get too many of them. Like what I decided to do one day was just make a list of 1 to 3 simple practices that are easy to
Right.
remember to do that. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, we got to dig
Yep.
out of this hole. This
Yep.
this this cannot continue. I mean,
Yep.
honestly, I was really surprised it got that bad, because the last time it ever got that bad, and this is not a common occurrence, was in 2023 when
Okay.
I remember contacting Patty Levin and asking her,
Yeah.
what do you suggest? And she, without hesitation, she said, yeah, check out the Feder work. And so I
Oh, wow.
immediately looked Pernilla's stuff up online and just
Yeah.
started working with that. And, the rest
That's
is
amazing.
history. But,
Yeah.
you know, I considering everything that has happened since you and I started these conversations, I never thought it possible that I could ever get to a place like that again. And so it was
Mm.
really sh shocking, surprising, um, disturbing, something that it's possible to get to that place. You know,
Yeah. And I'm sorry that it happened, but it is a really good illustration that again, I think it stems from our habit of believing the very convincing illusion of that self that's being generated by, the brain. So
hmm
you have the idea that, there was this Darrell who had all these struggles in the past, but he has triumphed. like, like the hero of a novel. And now he is on a path that is going to forever lead him out of that quagmire. Now he is going to be, no matter what comes up, the arrows get flung at him and they bounce off or pass over his head or whatever. But it's that idea that, and that might be an over exaggeration or oversimplification, but it is because we have that narrative sense that just creates that overarching idea that there is a unified being who is having a stream of experiences. And it's
Hmm.
exactly what you're finding is there is a conditioned brain, there is a conditioned machine who has in the past used the idea of suicide as a reasonable escape hatch from what was going on. Maybe not to actually put it into action because you're still alive. So that's great. But like I've said before, I think with us and to other people, and I had definitely experienced this in my own life, that when the suicidal thoughts arose, it wasn't so much that it was really a good idea and that I was really going to go through with it. Came very close at times, but what it really was that longing for a different being than what was here. It was a different life. It was the idea that, it wasn't a fully formulated idea, but that I was going to like cash in this one because I'm really unhappy right now with the way that something is. So the brain, just like we've talked about with when craving happens and you're sitting there trying to meditate, and the next thing you know, you're thinking about a banana, that is the brain putting up a distraction. It's putting up this idea of, well, you're really uncomfortable now, but food might distract you. And imagine eating something sweet, how good that would feel. Okay, the suicidal ideation is basically the most extreme version of that same exact process. You're in a
Right.
position where you feel really emotionally and or physically uncomfortable, and the brain throws up, is it a chocolate sundae, is it, a suicide cocktail? It's one of the two, and it just puts up this thing. And if you have had those thoughts in the past, and if you're in a really extreme position that seems really dire and inescapable in some way, the brain may go to one of those, higher octane choices. And it doesn't mean that we have to follow through with them, but it's just to be aware, okay, what am I really resisting being here right now? That is the moment when that comes up. It's just an old playbook that the brain has gone that is turning to try to distract you from this resistance that you have to life being the way that it is right now. So nobody, you or anybody who might be watching this, nobody has to follow through with those suicidal ideations because, again, just like the brain telling you that an ice cream cone would be wonderful right now, doesn't mean you have to actually get up and get an ice cream cone. It's just an advertisement put out by the mind. Same with any suicidal ideation. It doesn't have to be followed through. You can just be aware that, oh, this is what seems to be a compassionate response by the brain. You're in a state of suffering right now, and the brain is doing its best to alleviate that suffering. Now, the suggestions are not always good. The suggestions are not always helpful, but it shows that you can now turn around and go, okay, hold on a second. I love that you had the that secondary processing layer that, you have that meta awareness that goes, hold on, this is a strange thought. This is not a thought that I should be taking seriously right now. And the whole point of the practice that we're doing is to develop that metacognitive awareness so that you can have that second layer of like the wise regulator who sees the workings of the mind, but there's like this extra wisdom layer that's like, oh, yeah, okay, I'm not buying into that one. I see that thought. That's not me. I see the train going by. I'm not getting on. That is not you, Darrell, who has evolved to some new wise, evolution of your being. It's like training a new muscle or training this new extra cognitive part of the framework that is like a regulating agent that becomes hyper aware of what's going on and can make better suited choices. And so for anybody who's watching this who has, any history of suicidal ideation or current suicidal ideation, I just also want to say that doing all of this the meditation practice, the inquiry practice, anything that is developing that metacognitive awareness helps you to see thoughts as thoughts. And whether it's a suicidal ideation thought or whether it's a thought about getting a snack or having a drink or doing anything else, those are just suggestions by the mind and not it's not dictating that you have to follow through with it, and it's also not it's not saying that the brain doesn't know that that thing is actually going to be a benefit, right? Clearly, suicide probably won't be. Um, the brain is just playing out its old programming, and you have heard or seen or taken in some sort of conditioning in the past, which has given it that as a possible option that it throws out as a possible suggestion for behavior. Um, and the more we do the practices of meditation and inquiry, the more we develop that secondary wise awareness that can really scrutinize and be aware of these things without it being personal. And I think that's really the takeaway. So for you, I'm not surprised that those thoughts came up, but I am delighted that it shows that the metacognitive awareness that you've been working on developing for all these years of practice is doing its job. There's a non-personal recognition that that thought is not you. It's not what the totality of Darrell wants to put into action. It is a suggestion, and there's this other part of this chaotic being that we call, a me, that can also see it. There's that wise element that sees, okay, that is not a constructive suggestion. Thank you for that, but we're not going down that road. What else can we do? Oh, we can watch some of those old videos and take a different task, right? So I think at no point should we become complacent and expect that our old behavioral patterns are completely inaccessible or that our old
Yeah.
thought patterns are never going to arise again. Of course they are. You've had decades of conditioning that has made this structure what it is, and not all of those neurons are changing shape. Some of those pathways are still there. They're well ingrained, but you have this new extra layer of processing that is able to be aware of what's going on and choose differently than you ever would have been able to in the past because you have more connections between regulating regions of the brain.
Um, See if I can. There was something that came up in response to something you said. Um, I lost it. Well, I do want to mention a couple of other things um, I made notes of because I figured I would probably forget them if I didn't. When you started off with what you just said, you started talking about the believability of
Mm.
someone who's having experiences and going through something, and they used to be in this place and these things happened to them,
Yeah.
and they worked with they did various types of work and practices and got this result. And the idea of someone that is somehow static through all of that. And it's interesting because the first video that I pulled up, I'd actually been listening to it in the car when I was making my way back from Arlington that one day with Susanna to here. And so I stopped it. And then when I pulled the video up later, it was right at that point.
Oh, wow. That's
So
great.
the next thing you went into, I mean, I sat down, I got a notepad because I knew I was going to make some notes, and I won't read the whole thing, but I'll just read the first paragraph or so with what you started with in mind. This stuff
Yeah.
we're working. By the way, this is a word for word quote of what you say in the video.
Okay.
This stuff we're working on for ourselves. It feels like we're working on something really real initially. This is my story. This is me working through something. This really happened to me. This really is my cross to bear, and I'm really fighting with it. That all feels really true. As you see, wait a minute. I don't even really remember most of my past. I can't even verify the things I do remember definitely happened or happened the way I think I did. I'll stop there. Point
Yeah.
is you're without realizing it reiterating that same idea. And it's hard not to interpret that as, okay, so here's something you really need to pay attention to, and get clear on.
Yeah.
Now, where this went to is interesting, because what it wound up turning into was a video that was just suggested, the way YouTube works.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
well, actually, no, that's not true because I did type in something about identification with thought, and there was one video that seemed like it might actually be relevant. And so I listened to it, and it was a short video by this woman talking about, I don't know how to sum it up simply. She was getting to the fact that thoughts really don't have substance. They're not
Mhm.
necessarily true. And what I turned that into was, asking a lot of questions. And the big one was, well, where does thought even get its authority from? Why
Mm.
do we believe thought without question? We treat thought as if it's inherently and even possibly absolutely true. And
Yeah.
so I've been that's kind of where I've been heading to lately. Let me interject real quick and say I've been having a hard time getting to this stuff because one of the things that happened with getting here was that it really kind of upset what ability I had to remember to apply these practices through the course of the day. And that was already something that was suffering because I don't know, the last 90 days, 4 months or so at the house in Arlington was that was already starting to diminish the stress level and all the various things that were going on in the chaos. A lot of that stuff really started to get forgotten through the course of a day. So part of this is just getting back in the habit of remembering to like for instance, if I'm talking with Nicole and something happens and there's a really strong sense of self, I'm starting to get pretty good at a part of the time anyway,
Mhm.
remembering to look in that moment. Okay, so what is it that feels like a self? What are the
Yep.
component
Excellent.
parts? What is
Yep.
creating a sense of there being someone here? And I can look and go, okay, well, there's this sensation in the body, and there are these thoughts, mental pictures, and the sensations in the body. Somehow, I don't quite understand it, give those thoughts and those mental pictures this intense verisimilitude. Like
Yep.
this really is true. And when it's not, it's just these component parts all
Yeah.
acting in concert. So it's getting back to a place of even some of the time being able to remember to apply these practices, which is why I wrote down that
Yeah.
thing I mentioned earlier
Yep.
about three simple practices. I'm just in the forgetting phase, that phase where you need
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
do it, but
Yep.
when the opportunity presents itself, I'm saying this just for benefit of people watching,
Yep.
then the moment comes and you realize after it's over, damn it, I forgot.
Yeah.
Well, you got to do a
Yeah.
lot of forgetting before you get to the remembering. That's been my experience anyway.
It's absolutely true. You really do. I mean, it's the same way with anything. It's not just spiritual practice or the psychological practice or something like
Mhm.
that. It's literally any task that you want to do. I mean, even just like learning an instrument, you have to remember to pick up the instrument and practice, and you have to do it. Like we need to build up those positive habits to do it. But I think what you had brought up is really interesting in a couple different ways. When you say about like, why certain thoughts feel like they have some sort of verisimilitude, why do some of them feel more true than others? And I think there are two ways of going about the explanation. And I'm about to sneeze. So before I start, I'm just waiting for it to. See, I called it out, and then it was just like, no, 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 you saw me. I'm gonna wait till you're not expecting me. So, okay.
Yeah,
Um,
shame it away.
yeah. So the first thing is, I think we don't know. I've read really convincing and interesting neuroscientific explanations for why certain thoughts seem more relevant than others,
Hmm.
and they paint a very convincing portrait of the inner workings of different regions of the brain flagging certain material as emotionally relevant versus others. You have all of the pre-weighting of all of the priors that have happened in your life that is accumulate very long complicated explanations of it, which I think bear a lot of. I think it's reasonable to consider that those are probably a good deal of the answer to the why. But the problem is that that doesn't actually help us. I think what it
Uh,
does is having like a scientific or neuroscientific explanation for those of us who are kind of skeptical and questioning and all of that, it gives you something to um, kind of quiet that curiosity aspect. It gives you some bone to chew on where it's like, okay, well, I think that makes sense to me. That feels okay. I'm going to go with that explanation for now. But it doesn't actually help you in your practice at all. If anything, it might be useful for, again, devaluing that sense of the self who really believes it and who has maybe even a fault that you still believe certain thoughts and not others, and that's, I should be beyond that, and all of those things. I think having an idea that, okay, this is just autonomous regions of the brain communicating with each other at a
Mhm.
subconscious level before this conscious awareness of Todd or Darrell or anybody else has even come online and become aware of it, that can help kind of alleviate that sense of uh, ownership of the believability of a thought, or the one who believes it. So it can be useful sort of secondarily as something that yeah, just calms down that grasping for asking why. The more important thing is what you got to secondly, which is in your direct experience, because people have been making, you know, great strides in not believing thoughts for thousands of years before neuroscience ever came along. So there is
Mhm.
clearly something in practice that causes changes without actually knowing the underlying circuitry or physiology that's causing the thing. And
Huh.
I think this is where it's important to separate what the actual why is versus in my experience, what does why feel like? So we can perhaps go the scientific route to get to the actual why of neurons interacting, et cetera, neurotransmitters and hormones and all of that. But I think what's more important for us is to come down to just what you asked is in any given moment when a feeling or a belief feels real, feels true. That's why I'm always pointing back to checking in with the direct experience to see which observable uh, symptoms of that believability are there, or symptoms of that truthiness is there at this moment, because that's also developing that metacognitive awareness that uh, sets that wise observer apart from the thought itself. Because normally when we have a thought that feels really true, I have a thought that, I don't know, um, life is very stressful and I need to do something to get rid of this stress. If it feels like it's this fully embodied thought that feels absolutely true, there is no questioning it. The body feels a certain way. The thought seems to align with what the body feels. You view your external circumstance and you see stress everywhere because it's coming through the stressful life filter. Everything seems to be pointing to the truth of it. When you have that practice of stepping back to, hold on, why does it feel true that life is stressful right now? Then you're developing that extra objective observer muscle capacity, whatever we want to call it, that can actually check in and go, oh, but there's actually this feeling of tension in the body. There's this feeling of stress. There's this agitation in the body. There's lots of muscular tension. Heart rate is up, all of the different physiological things. And you can see that those are taken as being proof that life is stressful right now. But it's a body that is in a state of agitation. There's a body that's in a state of stress. But it doesn't mean that everything is truly stressful in this moment. Um,
Right.
you can start to see that the thought itself is just a stream of words going through the mind right now and is not actually indicative of something true necessarily. It's just a stream of words. It's sound that's, floating through this nebulous container of mind. And then you can look around you and you can actually start to see that the wall is not stressful and that plant is not stressful and that sun is not stressful and the air is not actually stressful right now and all the things that aren't. And you can start to develop that questioning mentality that is able to feel and to think, but also to recognize the thoughts and to see experience the feelings from a distance, where it becomes impersonal. There's this second layer of observer awareness that can take in what's here without identifying with it and making it uh, immediately personified as being me. And that is really what we're developing in all of these practices, just to be able to have that extra, the open the door a little bit so that there's some breathing room there, and you can start to let the light in and see that this experience is not the only experience that's available. And I think developing that observer is the most important thing, or that
Hmm.
you know metacognitive awareness, whatever metaphor we want to use for that.
Well, second, forget that. That was the first thing that became apparent once I started casting about for some way out of the hole I let myself get pulled into.
Yeah,
And when all of this, first thing was just recognizing how bad things had gotten, or how bad they appeared to have gotten,
yeah,
and then doing something about that. The second thing was after I'd started doing that was that video I mentioned, and realizing I never really had taken the time to question thought, the nature of thought.
mm, yeah,
And I realized this is something that's been overlooked
yeah.
almost completely. I've,
Amazing.
I've never really taken the time to look into that. And so now I'm trying to answer some of these questions. Like I said,
Yeah,
why do we even believe a thought? What gives it its
yeah,
believability? Where does it seems to have some absolute authority? Where in the hell does it get that from? Because
yeah,
I can't see any source of authority other than just the fact that for some reason we got, at least here in the West, I don't know about elsewhere, I think probably the whole world has this problem. We kind of put thought and thinking on a throne, and
yeah,
just, no one ever says it out loud, but the subtle underlying message is, well, if you think it, it must be true, which is utter
yeah.
bullshit.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But then the next question is, how do you begin to dissolve that? I mean, I can keep questioning it, but
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to begin to um, take away its authority. So it's a process.
Yeah, I was going to say the question is, is there an assumption that you're going to stop having maybe questionably true thoughts, or is it just that you want to be able to recognize immediately the impersonal lack of validity that those thoughts actually
The second
contain?
one, the way I would describe it is learning to see more or less instinctively that thoughts are not inherently true. They do not have
Yeah,
an inherent authority.
yeah, yeah, and that is really just something that comes with practice. That it's becoming aware, because we use thoughts constantly. That
Right.
is our entire. We've talked about this in the past. If we're really going down that rabbit hole, there is no distinguishing anything from thought. When we really get to the base of it,
Mm,
every aspect of your being is a thought. Depending exactly on how we define thoughts, but meaning it's all mind generated,
right.
right? You might have verbal thoughts, you might distinguish that separately from like mental image thoughts, and you might distinguish that separate from emotion thoughts and memories and things like that. But fundamentally, the
Mm,
memory that you have of, if I said to remember right now what you had for breakfast this morning, and you can close your eyes and you can visualize whatever you've eaten today and or yesterday or whenever, that image that's created in the mind is still being generated in the visual cortex, exactly like what is being generated right now with you looking at a computer screen. That is the same wetware which is creating that same mental image. And fundamentally, we really can't determine that one of those is more or less of a thought than another, because all of it is mind generated.
well, Oh, I thought you were done. Go ahead.
No, no. Well, I was just gonna say. In fact, I was just reading recently. The current CEO of Google DeepMind had actually gone to school for neuroscience, and when he was doing that, they did. He was involved with a study where they were testing people who had damage to the hippocampus, and what they realized was that people who had uh, inability to generate memories, from the past, also could not generate imagination of themselves in the future. So if you because the hippocampus deals with, memory consolidation and creation, and so if you have a damage to the brain that won't let you generate a memory, you also can't imagine into the future. All of that is imagination, right? Memories have no more truth to them than our imaginations about the future.
Right.
And we can essentially extrapolate that out even to what you are currently seeing right now. Yes, there is a bit more of a, fundamental reality to it, because hopefully what you're taking in the mind is generating is based on actual, income coming in through the senses. But but in practice, your actual internal experience of that is still effectively a type of thought. It's still a mind generated apparition, which is why if you do heavy psychedelics, you're not changing the real world out there. You're changing the way that the mind is representing the world,
Right.
right? So from the start, I think it's really important to become aware of this, when we hear auditory thoughts or when we see auditory thoughts and memories and thoughts about the future. And for people who have aphantasia and aneuralia, they have thoughts that are in all sorts of other conceptual manner. And just whatever our circuitry is, we get used to becoming aware of that. And I think it's less important to be concerned about why they are there, or even why they feel important. I think it's important to be curious about it, but it's not something that you're going to get to a because the way that you phrase it makes me feel like you're trying to get to a satisfactory answer in that regard, like why this thought feels really convincing. And I think you're going to find that there are certain bodily attributes, um, certain things that show up in your experience that make it feel uh, believable or true. But I'm not sure you're ever going to get a convincing why answer, because that's the mind trying to generate some connection to something that we don't necessarily have. Do you know what I mean?
I don't know if that's right or not. I don't know. You might be right that I might be trying to get to a convincing answer. What I thought, what it felt like I was doing was trying to just unseat this previously unquestioned authority
Yeah.
and bring it to a place where, um, as a general rule, I mean, there might be exceptions, and maybe it's something that will change. The balance will shift over time if it's something that's stayed with long enough. But get it to a point so it's no longer just an assumption of a thought being true, even if it's to a relative degree. Like, okay, this thought about not putting my hand on a hot stove is more true than that.
Yeah.
Which even then, it's not that one's more true than the other. It's just it has more relevance.
Hmm.
Um, but that's really is what's at work here is the the drive to unseat the thoughts. I don't know how else to say it other than what I've said before. Just
Yeah.
unseating its unquestioned authority.
Hmm.
Uh, and one of the first things that became clear was that so far I haven't found anything that we can do that there's nothing that we do that seems to truly require thought. Like someone might
Mm.
say, okay, you're driving down the road and a car is on, you've got a car that's in your lane, it's oncoming.
Yeah.
I don't need to think about that to get out of the way of
Yeah.
the car. or going back to what I said a moment ago, I don't
Yeah.
need to think, don't put your hand on the stove. The body mind system already knows
Yeah.
that. It
Yeah.
doesn't require thought. And so, extrapolating from that, it seems like there is nothing that we can do or need to do that really genuinely requires thought. And so, once again, we come back to this idea that it seems like thought has this importance and this primacy and necessity put on
Mhm.
it that I don't really know that it really truly requires. So it's just, again, it
Yeah.
all comes back to it needs to be questioned and needs to be put in a place where it's not seen as something that is more or less true just because that thought has appeared.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's so many things in this. Um, because it's true on, on most of our basic functioning. You're right. We don't really need conscious thought for that because all of it's being automated by subconscious processes. Once you learn to drive a car, it actually gets in the way if you start thinking about what you're doing and
Right,
how do I turn on the signal and then, all right, it's over here. And yeah, am I pushing hard enough on the gas? And yeah, we can't consciously control all of that. It has to be automated. So
right,
thankfully we're good at doing that sort of thing. I think there are some examples where thinking, uh, uh, because we can have these kind of thought feedback loops. And so when certain things bubble up to the surface into the conscious mind with a thought, right? Because most of our thinking is done subconsciously, and there's no
right,
awareness of it. It's all happening well before conscious awareness can get involved.
right.
Some of these thoughts come out into the conscious awareness, and I have seen some things that seem like when we get into those, like, planning cycles, for instance, right? Like if I'm going to plan a trip or plan out a long-term goal or whatever it is, that doesn't happen just subconsciously all on its own. There is a feedback loop that happens between taking in information. Maybe I'm thinking about all I'm going on vacation and I'm thinking about all the different places that I want to go to. There is a function of picturing that place, seeing how it feels, remembering it, writing it down. Oh, and that would lead me to this and this and this. Um, verbalizing all of it out loud isn't necessarily important, but there is some feedback of when those things are in the conscious mind, um, that then kind of causes a chain reaction that leads to more of this subconscious stuff happening, which leads to the next one. And so there is a lot of like subconscious stuff, occasional bubbles, but it does feed back into the subconscious again.
Right.
So there is something to be said for using thought as a tool when necessary, but also something to be said for being aware that thought is not omniscient. It doesn't know anything beyond its own processing and what it's taking in. Um, and it is super interesting just to try to get in that sort of bind of looking of looking for thought, right? Because again, going back to what I said, that basically our entire experience is nothing but one layer of thought after another. But
Mhm.
in the process of looking for thought, it's a really useful tool because you can see the different components that make up what we take to be thought. We can also see the experience of the one who is questioning the thought and then hopefully get to realize that that too is another thought. Um, we we start to get into those kind of nested turtles all the way down of thought upon thought upon thought upon thought. But
Huh.
it's important to do the practice to actually look for it so that we can break that cycle of both believing that thoughts are true and real. And if I think it, it's absolutely the way that the world is. And also that I can somehow be aware of thoughts in a way that isn't already invoking another thought, or that I can question thoughts without doing it as a thought.
Huh. That'd be kind of
And,
tricky.
Yeah, yeah. Any questioning of a thought is itself another thought. Any, any,
I hadn't
any,
noticed that.
any awareness that we have of a thought is itself another layer of thinking.
You're right. And it's see, that's the thing that's kind of, I don't know if this disturbing is the right word, but it's the first thing that came to mind. That's the thing that's kind of disturbing or maybe frustrating is that that is true, but it had completely escaped my attention.
Yeah. But it is so it's that whole the very old metaphor of a fish not realizing that it's swimming in water, right?
Mhm.
It is the entirety of the experience is thought. And
Yeah,
that's what I'm pointing to is literally it is like the water that we swim in is thought. It is everything. You can't stop thought from happening. It's constantly happening. And the very experience that we have, even when the um verbalizing or image generating part of the mind might go silent temporarily. And when it does, what you are seeing is no more foundationally real than any thought that you have just come up with because it's still all being mind generated. You
right,
cannot, by virtue of being a biological being, escape that.
right.
And again, it's really helpful to observe it and it's like um in the Zen tradition, it's like really, striving to figure out what mu is or to, get into the koans of, you're really trying to use the mind until it burns itself out. And then you have that, oh, right. Yeah. Okay. It's the same idea that you have to really search for thought and what thought is and how to, only to find out that there's really never been anything but it.
Well, one of the things from the Pali Canon that comes up for me over and over and over again in recent months, um, and it has something to do with the conversations we've had in the last 5 or 6 months, is, and I don't even remember the sutta that it's in. I just remember the line where somewhere the Buddha was quoted as saying, "Mind is the forerunner of all things."
Hmm.
And damn, he really was right. I
You
mean,
nailed
and
it.
people read that and they'll go, "Oh yeah, sure," but you don't realize just what he was saying, the depth of what he was saying. I mean,
Yeah.
because he was saying what you're saying, that everything is
Yeah.
thought, and
Yeah.
there's you can't find anything that isn't.
No.
Hang on a
No.
second, let me think, Marlowe.
Yep.
I've got one of the other dogs over here because I had to take him to the vet for Susanna, and I haven't had a chance to take
Ah.
him back home yet. Hang on a second. Okay. Guess he doesn't need to go out. All right. Anyway,
I mean, it's like if you said, show me something that isn't made out of atoms.
right.
Good luck. Right? But it's so ubiquitous. It's so part of everything that we experience and can experience. It's foundationally made of atoms the same way as our direct experience of everything is made out of mind.
Well, where it goes to, at least is seems to be going to here in the last week or so, um, is there was saw something by Angelo DeLillo
Mhm.
about this, and he asked the question about this. He said, "What is it that believes the thought?" And I
Mhm.
thought that was a really helpful and interesting question. What is it that believes the thought? Because maybe that's the better direction to begin to look in. Because I don't feel like I don't feel like it's a wise move to say, and I'm not saying this is what you're implying, but I can see
Yeah.
how someone might. Okay, everything is thought. You're not going to find anything that isn't thought. Okay, enough said. Just move on.
Yeah. No, no,
It's
no.
yeah.
Definitely not saying that. Yeah.
There's definitely got to be some inquiry done into the nature of thought because I don't feel like it's wise to let it stand the seeming uh, absolute authority that thought has. I mean,
Yeah.
think about it. I mean, to pick a really out there left field and extreme example, I'm remembering the guy who got climbed up to the top of the tower at the
Yeah.
University in Austin back in what was that, like 69 or something.
Yeah.
And the guy I can imagine it, knowing what it's like to be human. There was a feeling in the body. He probably felt really disturbed. And then on the heels of that physical somatic activity was a thought to do what he did, whether it's
Yeah,
one thought or a series of thoughts. But
yep,
if that guy could have said, hold on a minute, why in the hell would I believe that? That's just a thought. A thought doesn't have any substance. It doesn't have any inherent truth.
yeah.
That might not have, that event might not have shown up in history. You
But
know,
I think that's such a fascinating topic, or a fascinating example, though, because he knew that there was something wrong, because he put in his will, or he wrote in his
uh,
note that he wanted his brain to be autopsied because he knew there was something wrong, but he didn't know what it was, and the compulsion drove him to do it anyway. And it turned out he had a tumor on his amygdala, and
well,
that that basically, when that happens, that causes that kind of behavior. And it's
whew.
actually a really strong sort of mechanistic, or yeah, it's a oh, I'm looking for it. It's a good bit of proof in the kind of mechanistic view of the brain that
Mhm.
when you probe or damage, or influence certain parts of the brain, certain behaviors are more likely to happen. And he was a prime example of that, that actually he was aware that there was something wrong, but was not able to stop the compulsion to do it. And
Hmm.
afterwards, it was a very reasonable, or a reliable, reason, was a tumor causing it.
Well,
Mm.
without having any knowledge of that, I picked a
Yeah.
what might be a less than ideal example because really all I want to get to is the fact that, I mean, aside from examples like that, aside from somebody who's got some kind of neurological issue going on,
Yeah.
assuming a properly functioning and healthy neurological system, why would you believe anything? Okay,
Yeah.
maybe a better example. I don't know. See, him and I've talked for years about how sometimes we'll have the most horrible thoughts about doing some kind of harm or something, and
Yeah.
we both have the same reaction. We
Yeah.
both are horrified by it. I mean,
Yeah.
I know I've thought about doing things that it'd break my own heart.
Yeah.
It would hurt me in the deepest way possible. And I can see those thoughts come up now. In the past, they were really they were a source of torment because I
Mm.
felt like, why would I think that? What's wrong with me that I would think such a horrible thing? Well, I had one of those the other day for the first time in a while, and I thought, well, that's just a thought. I don't have to give that any of my time. I don't have to be
Yeah.
disturbed by it. I don't have to worry about my behavior. That it's just a thought. It doesn't have any substance. And
Yeah.
I was able to dismiss it very quickly with those other thoughts. And okay, enough. Not it,
Yeah.
it doesn't have any substance. It's just a thought. It's like smoke rings.
Yep.
Um, and that seems to be where all of this is pointing to, is getting to a place where we can have a thought about anything, and it doesn't have to create a cascade of reactions and disturbance and feeling awful. It can just be, that's a thought, and let it go.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that requires, it seems to require,
Hmm.
getting to a place of understanding that thoughts don't have any inherent authority or truthfulness.
Yeah.
But how do we
Absolutely.
get to that? That
Yeah.
seems like that
Yep.
requires a dedicated amount of time working in that direction.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's why I had said before that, even though kind of the punchline is that we are swimming in a sea of mind and everything is
Mhm.
thought, that it's really helpful to do the practices to become aware of, trying to find each thought, and trying to become aware of each thought, and trying to question the validity of each thought, and find out why exactly it is that this thought feels really valid, and this one, just doesn't. Like, why does this one feel to me to be true? I mean, right now, if I'm trying to think of a good one. Um, yeah, that, like, it feels true to me that the earth is largely covered with water. right? Because I have learned that that's the case. But even so, if somebody was online and saying, no, there's actually, very very little of the Earth's surface is covered in water. It's almost entirely land mass, and then you have a little puddle here and a little lake there, and that's it. That would feel inherently wrong because it contradicts everything that I've learned. So the question is, what do you actually feel in your body when you are confronted with a contradictory thought?
Hmm.
Because that is the physicality of it is going to give you some feedback into why this thought feels in my gut to be true. Or we would say, like, it feels viscerally true that the it's daylight during the day, or the sun is out during the day and the moon is out during the night. You have a feeling, if somebody tries to tell you otherwise, you will feel something in the body that responds to that. There is a very strong bodily component to that feeling of certainty, and also the feeling of your certainty being challenged. Um,
Right.
people just go online on comment sections, and go to like a flat earth video and read the comment sections. People, even if you can't feel what those people who are responding are feeling, you can tell uh, the aggression and the all capsness of the responses, that they are feeling something in the body which is being propelled through their text. So notice what bodily components make you feel that something is true, and also that feel challenged, that come up in challenge when you're confronted with an opposite idea or opposite belief. But notice also, when you have an idea about whatever the thought is, I'm not a good person, for instance, you will feel, if that's a long-standing fundamental belief, you will feel certain cascades of sensation through the body when you think it, but you'll also probably notice a little montage of some sort of images showing up of reasons why you are not a good person. A little best of reel reminding you of all of your greatest hits of being an asshole. Like that will probably come along with it. So notice that. Notice that this is in cahoots. You have a thought, and then there's this kind of um sycophantic little part of the brain that's just like, yes, 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 here, I'll give you examples to prove that you're correct, here. And just notice those little examples that are popping up, that they're not real, they're not true, they are but supplementary thoughts that are being evoked because
Real.
something in the mind thought of something, and you have all of these little supplementing thoughts that come up in support of it. Be aware of those. So yeah, so notice the physicality of the belief, notice the supplementary thoughts of the belief, and just be aware of anything else in your experience that might come up that gives that one particular belief any sort of footing, any sort of feeling of verisimilitude. There's got to be something that is noticeable, but again, you probably won't get to the like real world why, right? Just like if
Ah,
you're
okay.
right, the way that I kind of see it is like, um if I say, like, if I hit this glass with a hammer and it breaks and the coffee pours out, you could ask me, why did that happen? And I would say, well, the hammer hit the glass and the glass broke and gravity acted on the water and it poured out. And that seems like a reasonable explanation. But you could go so much deeper into the atomic structure of all of that and into all, I mean, I can't even fathom the layers of, physical explanations that could actually be behind that. We're just at the like most gross level of metal bangs glass, glass shatters, water pours out. I think our experience is the same way. We really can't fathom the level of intricacy of what is going on in the brain and in the interaction with the environment. And so coming to a real grounded why of why anything is the way it is, I think is just simply beyond our capacity as primates.
Huh.
But
Okay.
within where it's like a functional why to get to is, yes, if you bang a glass with a hammer, it will break. If you have a thought and you feel this thing and you're not aware that you're feeling this thing, and if you see these other thoughts and you're not aware that those are supplementary thoughts, and if you aren't aware of the whole milieu in which that thought is appearing, then I believe it. Right? That's basically the level at which we're working here.
Huh.
And so we're just becoming aware of what is your actual experience of thinking, breaking it down into as many components as you can find that are available right now to awareness, because again, there isn't, we can't, mm, with meditation practice and with inquiry practice, you can kind of hone your awareness or your microscopic abilities to notice more and more subtle sensations and to notice more and more subtle layers of thought that you hadn't noticed. We can improve those things, but there are fundamental limitations because you are still using certain mechanisms of interoception and just limited capacities of awareness of what is going on in our experience. So within that awareness, or within that range of improvability, hopefully you can, get clearer on a lot of these things than you are before you start meditation practice. And I'm sure yours are way clearer now. You have much better sense of what's going on in the body and much better sense of what's going on in the mind than you did 20, 30, 40 years ago, right? Hopefully this is the progression, but you're never going to have it's like trying to work on your eyesight so much that you can see an electron without an electron microscope. Probably unlikely. Same
Right.
sort of thing, right? Be mindful of not looking for the ultimate why, but simply the why enough. The why right now does this feel true to me? And then simply by having that question mark, by having that doubt about whether this actually is true, because that's our first step, right? Most people don't even question a thought. It's just a thought because I thought it and it must be true.
Right.
By having that layer of questioning where we're pulling into doubt whether any thought that we have is actually accurate, and then analyzing to the best of our ability to whatever equipment we have, developed at this point, we investigate our senses, all of them. We investigate whatever internal thoughts happen to be coalescing around the original thought that seems to give it weight, if there are any. Notice anything that shows up in your experience and just be aware that those are all supporting aspects to why you feel the way that you do, that this is a true thought or a true belief. And let that be enough to where you sit there from your kind of elevated perch, aware now that that belief is just a belief, that the belief is just a thought, that that feeling that I have in the chest or in the gut that clenches up when I think of it, or that heaviness when I think I'm a terrible person, and I get that same slumping heaviness and that same withering pulling in, and all of that happens every time I think of that thought. Recognize each of those as the physiological signatures of just what they are. That the body is sloping in, there's heaviness on the shoulders, you feel a certain weightiness. All of that is contributing to the words that I'm a terrible person. But like we've talked about in the past, you haven't even gone to define what a terrible person even is. Like all of that is taken on faith. It's just shorthand created by the mind. There's no further introspection into any of that. So the more we can develop that level of awareness that recognizes, okay, the body is slumping when it hears or thinks certain words, that the mind generates a sentence that creates a cascade of things that happen in the body and also in the mind. And that whole thing creates this sense of that's a true thought or that's a true belief. When you're seeing it from that secondary perch where you're aware of it, you feel it, but you also feel that it's just the body in response to something, that it's not me who is truly dejected and who's truly a bad person because I'm in this posture. You're simply aware that the body is reacting in a certain way. Like if you touch poison ivy and the body starts reacting with itchy blisters, you don't think I, am you don't identify with being affected by poison ivy, that it's like a fundamental flaw in your being or something,
Right.
right? It's like it's an allergic reaction to the oils that are on the, so it's just the way that that the skin responds. It's the same sort of thing. We can have that remove where we can see the skin reacting to poison ivy and not take it personally. And we're developing the same response to the body slumping in and feeling, heavy and dejected and crying and having all the other experiences that it has. We can develop that awareness where you can observe it, you can feel it, you can live it, you can be doing all that, and also know that, yeah, but it's not actually the entirety of the experience, is it? It's not actually built on something fundamentally true, is it? There is some question about the validity of every part of it, just because we're aware of the the conditioned nature of our experience.
So I feel like it might be a good idea to kind of sum this up really simply at this
That
point.
would be good. Please
Um,
do.
so
Good luck.
you should know better by now.
You're good at this. I'm not. So,
So what you're saying in a nutshell is that to take on a practice of questioning thought and to focus mostly, or this is based on what I've seen on the internet, where people
yeah.
put the focus on the thoughts exclusively.
Mm,
So whether exclusively or even largely putting your focus on the thought is um, is kind of a fundamental error in the inquiry,
mm,
because we need to question not just the thought, we need to question the beliefs about the thought, we need to
mm.
question the physical sensations that arise when a thought happens. There are all of these other components that need to be examined and taken into account if we're going to question the truth of the validity of thought.
Yeah. And I mean, there's something to be said. Everybody has different practices that speak to them. So I wouldn't say it's a fundamental error of just
Mhm.
focusing on the thought, but in my practice, it was way more powerful to become aware of the totality, the holistic experience of every
Mhm.
thought than just focusing on the sounds of the thought in the head or the imagery of the thought in the head or something like that. Because, or the more conceptual again, if you don't have sound or visual thoughts. But, and again, I just wanted to, when you say to question the, all of those aspects, yes, but I just want to make sure that the questioning isn't being done through more thought. I think maybe just open observation is maybe a better word than questioning in that regard, because it's observing what's happening in the body. It's observing the sound of the thoughts. It's observing the supplementary thoughts that come on. Um, it's not so much like questioning to go deeper into them or
Okay.
investigate more, because that can just lead you into spirals of more thought, more thought, more thought. What
Right.
I'm really talking about is just this open awareness of, when I have a thought like, you know I'm there's something fundamentally wrong with me, and I feel this cascade of that happens in the mind and the body. Just open awareness of what is happening in the body right now. How does it feel? How is the body responding? What is happening in the realm of thoughts, all of them, not just the original one, which arguably is gone by the time you are aware of it,
All right.
right? But all of the supplementary thoughts that come on immediately afterwards, which seem to give credence to that original thought, which is no longer in existence. Um, if that thought comes back around again, just notice it's a new iteration of that same old thought again, and recognize, how does it affect the body? How does it do, does it have any connection to the external world? Right? Like, it's really, I think, helpful to question call into question any the validity of any aspect of the experience without intentionally questioning it, right? It's being aware of it with kind of an open curiosity, but without probing for a specific answer. And that's really what I'm pushing back with the word question, is because
Okay.
I do kind of feel like there might be, when you say it, like an actual looking for something. And
Okay.
what I'm suggesting is a passive but curious observation of what's going on, so that you are just aware of what is happening, and that awareness effectively breaks the spell of the belief in the veracity of whatever the thought was. But you don't have to do that by like digging deeper and deeper and deeper to find some kernel of crystal, in at the bottom, that you're gonna like recognize it now. I figured it out. I got it.
Hmm.
It's not that. It's in the looking is the finding. In being open and observing and just seeing what's there without the initial learned bias of, um, when you have a thought originally, we learn to take all of that, the whole holistic picture of it, all at once as a true thought. So when someone asks you your name and you just immediately respond with your name and it feels true to you, that is the whole learned experience has happened at once. You've learned that when a doctor's office calls your name and you immediately respond and it really feels like you that they're calling, you will feel certain recognitions light up in the body when you hear your name called. You will, immediately, unquestioningly respond. You will have this whole internal image and internal thought system that creates what Darrell is supposed to be in the world, and how you think the dental hygienist or doctor or whoever is calling you is going to see you as, right? All of that is reflected immediately when you hear your name being called. And instead of like looking for what the real crystal of Darrell is that's underneath all of that, or what the real crystal of the belief is underneath all that, what we're doing is simply openly observing, when you hear your name called, what are all the different parts of that experience that light up, and taking it slowly, one by one. So, hear your name, maybe like record your name onto a tape or something being spoken, and you can, or, I'm very old. I just recommended people putting it on tape, um, or recording it into something. So you went to your phone, you play back I can't believe that my mind went to tape after. I mean, this is the perfect example of like old programming being coming about,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, Playing, just record the name being spoken on the phone, and every time you play it, notice, right now I'm just going to be aware of what happens in the body when I hear my name. And then tune in to all the different things that flutter or tighten up or happen when you hear that, and be aware that's what's happening in response to the name being heard. And then pay attention to the visual thoughts and the auditory thoughts and any other things that show up in the thought space when you hear the name, and becoming aware of that over and over again. Just that open awareness of it without identifying with it, without putting anything more on it than that, that awareness of what happens in all of its different components breaks down that that spell of hearing the name and feeling the totality of Darrell just being evoked immediately. Does that
Well,
make sense?
oh, absolutely. It made sense then, and the way you explained it before. My concern was not anything to do with what you're describing. My concern
Okay.
was with what I've come across, looking at things whether on YouTube or things elsewhere on the internet, is that, and I could be misunderstanding what I've seen, but it
Mhm.
sure sounds this way. It seems to be very focused, um, exclusively or almost exclusively on just the obvious first thought. Like you
Mhm.
have a thought and then the idea is to question that thought. And it as what I've seen has never once said anything, what I've seen and heard has never once said anything about questioning the thoughts that follow it, questioning the
Yeah.
sensations that arise in the body when when a thought becomes present.
Mhm.
Um, it hasn't said anything at all about the beliefs about thought. And
Mhm.
the beliefs about thought have been present in every single thing I've seen or heard. And
Yeah.
no one has said anything about, hey, there's a belief you have about the thought. You need to check that out too.
Yep.
It's all been very very single pointed to the point of having left out everything else you've described. And so it seems to me like we're doing ourselves a disservice if we're only focused in on that sort of thing in that way. We're doing
Mhm.
ourselves a disservice if we're not taking out what you have referred to as the holistic experience of thought.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm completely I agree. Again, different strokes for different folks. For some people, it might be more helpful to just home in on just the thought and just do that. But again, in my experience and from what I've seen, working with other people too, I just find it to be way more powerful to take in everything, not necessarily all at once, but like I described, even piecemeal, so that you can really develop that awareness more and more of all the components that make up this experience.
Well, intuitively, that makes more sense to me, and it feels more correct
Yeah.
without really meaning to put any kind of judgment on it. But it does seem more, it does seem to have more oomph because, like, for instance, when you mentioned, the beliefs about a thought, well, that's part of the whole package.
Yeah.
How can you be looking at examining the validity of thought if you're not looking at the beliefs you have about it because they go hand in hand.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. And always remember, everybody who's watching this, beliefs are also just another thought. There's no there's
Mhm.
no special class of thought that is a belief. I mean, we tend to use that term as though it really denotes something very special and almost unshakable. And I mean, even like legally protected, you know, like my beliefs are, you know, uh, sacred and,
Right.
cannot be questioned or challenged. And, yeah, it's great that we have laws that allow people to believe what they want to believe as long as it doesn't infringe upon the rights of other people.
Right.
But I think it behooves all of us to question exactly why that particular belief, which is just another thought, has been elevated to that status of having some special character. Where did you pick up that belief? Why does it seem true to you? What grounding do you have to believe it? And let that open up the whole Pandora's box of questioning everything.
Well, even when you asked that, the question that first popped up was, well, what even is a belief? I mean, it just seems like a thought that is invested with certain types of emotion.
Yeah, it is. It is. And often has, you know, it depends on what kind of belief it is, but we have usually experienced something or been told something in a way that it becomes unshakable in ways that, the thought all monkeys wear suspenders is hopefully kind of questionable, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't really have the same thing, but the beliefs, whether it's personal or religious or scientific or anything else that people take on, it is in the individual experience always just another thought. It
Right.
may or may not be true. The whether a belief exists or a thought exists, it may be true, it may not be true. The fact that you hold it doesn't mean that it's true, though. It's yeah. It, so I think one of the hardest things with doing this work is that people have to eventually get really honest with themselves
Hmm.
and question all of those things which seem to be taboo and unquestionable. We grow up thinking you can't question certain beliefs, certain aspects that just seem foundationally true. I think it's very important to question why they got elevated to that status to begin with, and what proof do we have that any of that is actually worthy of that um,
Hmm.
that energy, the devotion, the belief, all of that we put into it. And it's really uncomfortable for a lot of people. Some people it's much easier than others. Um,
Right.
but for a lot of people it's a real struggling point because we're basically taught not to go there societally.
Right. Yeah.
You so this is where we shake off all of the indoctrination and start to find that we are nothing but, just like I said, our entire experience is just a sea of mind. Our entire being is just one nested belief on top of another. And a lot of them are, some of them are conscious, but a lot of them are like unconscious beliefs because they're just like the foundational axioms of how we think everything around us is created. And as long as it's, this kind of unquestioned assumption about how things are, it's just another belief that can be challenged. And again, we may accept it, it may withstand the scrutiny and we still hold on to it, but it doesn't mean that um, that it shouldn't be questioned and shouldn't be challenged in some way. And at the very least, just observe. Everybody needs to observe their experience to find out what it is actually like to believe that belief and to challenge that belief. And what would it be like to live a life without that belief present?
Interesting question. Well, I don't know uh, if that was a good place to put a cap on that because I wanted to go back to where all of that started because there was a
Yeah.
second part to that. The way that appears to me, all of the stuff I told you about the move over here, the very drastic change,
Yeah.
and then getting snared by thoughts that wound up leading to a very dark and uncomfortable place.
Yeah.
The thing that kept coming to mind over the last couple of months was that it felt like so much of that was tied up in and had everything to do with my liking and disliking.
Mm. Yeah.
And that's kind of important because the last time we spoke, I'd said something about really digging in and trying to get Fetter 5, 4-5 to a place
Yeah.
where we could say, at least for our purposes, we've done what we can do with it for now. Let's
Yeah.
let's move ahead.
Yeah.
And after that conversation, I jumped into that, and then things in the house started gradually getting more chaotic, and I became more distracted and more and more lost track of that, even though it did come to mind occasionally, but it was forgotten more than it was remembered. And then all of this, all of the current circumstances that have come to be have brought that back to my attention. And it really, I don't know how else to say it other than how I started this. It really does seem to be part and parcel of the liking and disliking. And the one of the things in that, one of the things about that is that first there's a question, which is how can we say that we feel like we have worked with Fetters 4 and 5, or if you want to make Fetter 5 the kind of the endpoint of that, how do we know that we've worked with that sufficiently to a point where we can, I mean, knowing we're always going to come back to these things
Yeah.
and they're not a linear process that
Yeah.
you're jumping around all over the place. Um, how do we know that we have got that to a point where we can say, okay, the conventional language around it are things like, okay, I've seen through Fetter 5 or I've dissolved
Yeah.
Fetter 5, however you want to put it. How
Yeah.
how can we say that we have done the work that needs to be done for now so that we can proceed past that and on to the 6 through 10?
Yeah. Well, first thing, well, two ways I think I would answer that. I think it is actually still good to proceed with the other ones, even if you haven't really fully finished 4 and 5. I think that because they all are working in tandem, right? It's all part of this self-delusion system that is, created. So it's actually, I really think it's helpful to work to some degree with all of them. Some might be easier once you have lost a lot of the reactivity, but still I think it's always good to be working on all 10 at the same time, because you also never know which insight you're going to have from 6 or 10 or something else is going to have some relevance to loosen something that's been stuck in some other aspect of your
Hmm.
practice when you're
Yeah.
just focusing on the first 5. um, so I think it's actually really, really beneficial to do that. So that's the first caveat there. But in terms of like 4 and 5, of really having that awareness of how weak it's become, or how non-reactive you are and that sort of thing, it's really coming down to being a good observer of your own life and the way that you honestly react in a given situation. Um, when some adversity happens, how quickly are you accepting and pivoting and rolling with it? How much are you in immediate resistance to it and complaining either externally or internally, or you know finding yourself pitted against the moment in some really some way that causes you suffering, is really the fundamental question. And um and how much are you constantly trying to fulfill the cravings that come up, that you have an idea for something and you find yourself on the way to it to satisfy it before you're even aware necessarily that this mind created imagery has shown up. It's all of those things that are kind of used in the assessment. I wouldn't say there's, yes, you can have experiences that are kind of like a big opening shift kind of thing, but not everybody has that. And it doesn't necessarily mean that everything is gone and all conditioning has been undone, right? It's
Right.
it's really is a process. Um, so I think to use a personal example, right? When we were away for the few months trying to figure out where we were going to move to and running into issue after issue after issue, there's having worked with 4 and 5 certainly does not change the external circumstances so that they suddenly magically just align with your greatest desires. It absolutely does not work that way. It's a matter of seeing what feels right, if you're moving towards what feels right, and then there are obstructions there. How do you relate? How do you respond to that? And I think for us it was like, largely, things would happen and it was like, okay, now let's pivot and see, can we work with that? Can we resolve that thing? But as exhausting as it was, because we were constantly moving in one direction and then going another, and then finding like, okay, constantly bouncing from one wall to another, basically, and it was a roller coaster of emotions and everything else. We weren't suffering in the way because we weren't fighting against all of it. It was trying to go with it and say, okay, well, we can just do this and we can do that. But there were just too many things. It just clearly was not feasible in the long run. But the actual internal experience of it wasn't constantly being in resistance to the moment. There was an acceptance that it was just, a crazy, unpredictable experience. And of course, if anybody is choosing what they would prefer, that wouldn't be it. But the question is, can you be equanimous while you're undergoing, sleeping on people's couches for months and, you know, completely rearranging life and having the ambiguity of not knowing what is going on from moment to moment and all of that. That it's in our relationship to what's going on that we can start to see how much work we have to have done and how much work there is left to be done.
Hmm.
So, like for you, I mean, when you had this whole big move and life shift and everything, how much like resistance are you having against being there, roommate situation, the amount of work that you're expected to do, all of those little things? How much is there like big external resistance to it? How much is there like minor internal resistance to it? And how much is there just an awareness of what is happening while still being able to be sort of emotionally um, disconnected isn't the right word, but objective or equanimous with it.
Boy, that's a tricky one to answer. Because some of the process of getting here, as I told you already, wound up for whatever reason. Again, I wish I could remember what it was that set it off, because I remember sitting here one day and I saw something, and I had this flash of walking down that road to the camp location I was going to be staying at, and my parents and my younger sister driving off in the car, and this huge wave of uncomfortable, this huge wave of hurt
Mm,
coming up. And so that kind of has obscured things. But when I think about the situation I described to you earlier with all of the the drinking, um, or having to be here to you know take care of things for Nicole. Like the thing with Nicole, it's not a problem. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's some resistance to it. There's okay. I really would prefer not to have to deal with removing all of these trees from three or four sides of the house.
mm,
Okay, but I'll do it. And some of that I don't know this for a fact, because I don't know how the thought really is affecting things, but there is the awareness of this idea that um, it's the least I can do to help her out, because she's
mm,
helped me out in a huge way. But there is resistance, but it seems to be modified by that awareness of the fact that this is somebody who's done me a tremendous service. Um, or situations with the roommate and resistance to it. But you know, I deal with a lot of it. I mean, there's a certain amount of
mm.
avoidance to certain things, but excuse me, the amount of hair and dust in this place is unbearable. My sinuses have really taken a hit in the last, what, I
Uh,
guess it's been 3 months.
yeah.
Um, but anyway, there's try to keep it simple. I would say there is resistance, but there's not been any place that I can think of where I've drawn a line and said no.
Mm,
Like for instance, there are certain quirks of personalities of people involved where I'll have a reaction. And at first I was reacting to it to some extent. I mean, there was never any great conflict, but I realized after a while that, hold on a minute, that reaction is telling you need to look at what's going on with you. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's look back here and see what's going on. So
Yep.
rather than putting up a fight and continuing to try to resist those things, it has turned into check yourself, check yourself. You know, that great phrase, I love it. It's an inside job.
Yep.
Um, on the other hand, there are places where it rears its head more clearly. I have been slowly tapering off the caffeine because it's been
Excellent.
made very, very clear to me that the caffeine, even though it doesn't affect me the way it used to, it still causes me problems.
Yeah.
And I'm able to do that. There are, it's like the old cartoons, the little angel on one shoulder and the little devil on the other.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas once upon a time, it would have just been all the little devil. And no way, I'm tired. I'm gonna, keep on shoveling, however many big tablespoons of coffee into this thing.
Yeah.
Now I'm able to successfully keep cutting it back and keep cutting it back.
Excellent.
Or another thing I've mentioned to you, the whole issue with kratom, I've been cutting
Yeah.
that back and cutting that back and cutting that back, and
Amazing.
there's some resistance, but on the whole, there is like 90-95% movement towards cutting it back. I mean, to the
Hmm.
point that we're well below half of what I used to consume in a day.
That's
I mean,
great.
probably something in the neighborhood of about one fourth of what I used to consume in a day. Um, or um, for some reason, I got stuck on these hard candies, and I'll consume way more of them than is really good for me. And
Yeah.
it became obvious to me the other day, wow, this really is a bad idea. Uh, and so that one has that one's a little harder to get to, and it's been interesting because I've been watching it, and in watching it, I really see how impersonal the whole thing is. It's
Yeah.
not it's not someone someone who has an issue with a behavior and having to try to this resist this activity in the mind. It makes it clear just how
Yeah.
impersonal it all is. Having said that, though, right now the the less I don't know how to say it, the the part of the mind that wants to um, have a handful of hard candies tends to get the upper hand. Although it's only been in the last 48 hours that it became obvious that, hey, you really need to go ahead and rein this in, or this needs to change. And so it still remains to be seen. Whereas in the past I could recognize that something was problematic and nothing would budge. It would just keep going
Yeah.
down that road.
Yep.
Nothing was going to stop it. Well, now for whatever reason, um, and I noticed I think it all kind of began last fall. We were talking about things related to this, and we had a discussion about something, and that something that we talked about, that we uncovered, seemed to unlock some of this, because the first thing that happened was all of the caffeine that I would have throughout the day just stopped. I mean, in a day, it
Something.
just
Yeah.
stopped. There was no
Yeah.
effort. It was just an awareness of this is not beneficial, and it just
Yep.
stopped. And it hasn't
Yeah.
returned. It hasn't
That's
returned. It's
amazing. Yeah.
cup of coffee in the morning, and then that's where it ends for the day.
That's great.
Um, so what's going to happen with this? Not really treating my body very kindly by eating this candy. I don't know. I can let you know in a week or two. I have a feeling, even if there is one voice that's fighting against it, the other voice will have more say now, whereas it used to have no say at all. It's
Yeah.
just at the mercy of the lesser impulse. All
And, yeah. Sorry.
Anyway, just to try to answer your question, I
Yeah.
really don't know, because it varies depending on what I'm dealing with, and who knows what's going on, who knows what's being activated in the
Yeah.
subconscious. I mean, it may be harder when dealing with this other person because I'm seeing someone who, you're just watching death slowly happening, and it kind of
Yeah.
reminds me of me 22 years ago. And
Yeah.
who knows how parts of the mind are reacting to that. You'd think that there would just be gratitude there, but who knows? There may be a part of the
Yeah.
mind that goes, oh God, I don't want to be reminded.
Yeah, completely. And that's what I love that you bring that up, because that was going to be my suggestion is it sounds like you've been having those candies a lot throughout the day, right?
Hmm.
But the good thing is, it's something where it's not like biologically addictive, right? Because those are a trickier thing to suss out a lot of times when we're working with it, because if it's
Right.
something that so candy generally not that. Um, and especially if it's like one particular type of candy and it's not like, just that you're craving sugar throughout the day, which could be
Right.
for some people a sign of, something being off in their biology, right? Um, I think what's important then is when you're going for that candy, what is happening the moment before you reach out for it? What
Hmm.
like use that, arm movement to signal you to hold on a second. As
Okay.
soon as that arm is going out to grab it, what was just in the mind? What were you just thinking about? What were you just feeling? And what were you just doing? Like, are there certain times of the day when you are doing certain things that make you more inclined to reaching out for the candy? Are there interactions with roommates that make you more inclined to
Hmm.
uh, reach out for candy? Are there certain thought processes? Are you, just thinking about Susanna and then you reach for the candy? Like, it could be any number of different things, but the question is, what is happening each time just before, when the mind sends out that, ooh, you know what would be tasty right now? Every time one of those little thoughts comes up, there was something just before it. And
Okay.
the interesting, helpful, meaty part is to find out what exactly it is that was happening just before each of those instances when you were reaching out for that candy.
Okay. Um, it's funny because in describing that, it's, and I know you don't really mean this, but the way it kind of sounds on first blush is
Yeah,
it sounds very, very much like George Carlin. It sounds like you're saying to be aware before you're aware. And it's,
yeah,
how do you do that? Because
yeah,
that's the tricky
yeah,
thing, because, that thing happens in the moment.
yeah,
And, and I'm sure I'll figure it out as I go along. But right now, thinking about it in advance, kind of preparing for it is, okay, so something pops up before that impulse to go and get candy shows up.
yeah,
That means paying it, knowing you've got to really be aware, because you've got to notice when that happens. Otherwise, you're back to that Carlin-esque being aware before you're aware.
yeah,
How the hell
yeah.
do you do
And
that?
yeah, and there are two things. The one that I used to find the most helpful, and I'm not sure. I think everybody can do this. I don't know. Maybe it's just like with practice kind of a thing. But like again, to date myself, I considered it like rewinding the tape. And so, you know,
Oh,
you
okay.
would go to reach out for the candy, and then that's when you hit pause and then rewind. What were you just thinking about? Check in. There's
So,
probably still some like residual sensations in the body, some memory of what you were just thinking about, something there. Rewind the tape and find out what was just happening before you got that urge to reach out for the candy.
okay, so it's because there have been times we've talked about it, and it was really not preferable to look back, a few seconds ago when inquiring into something. But in this case, it's different. In this case,
Yeah.
the impulse to turn and get up out of the chair and walk over to where the candy is
Yep.
would be your red flag, or your pointer.
Exactly.
Okay, what's going on right now, or in the last 5 or 10 seconds?
Exactly. Rewind the tape. What was going
Okay.
on?
All right.
Um, yeah, the example that I always gave that was like a really good one for me personally when I was yeah, doing a lot of it. I remember I was grocery shopping and it was at the local co-op, which is very expensive. It has really gone up in price in a while, but I took care of my mom for a lot of years, and we used to shop there and a bunch of other places. And after she had died, I remember I was going to, I went to the co-op and I was walking around, and I noticed that my finger was just kind of drumming like do 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 on the shopping cart, and it was
Uh,
just a little thing, and we went, "What's that about?" And I rewound the tape, and it was like I had had all of these thoughts about remembering when I used to shop with her, about the financial insecurity now of shopping there, all of those things had just been playing through and they were mostly unconscious. I wasn't like actively aware of them, but that was causing me to do on the shopping cart. And that was
Interesting.
the little cue that there's something going on that you could look at. And so in rewinding the tape, it's like, oh, okay, there we go. That's what it was. And that was the little not feeling, I was feeling uncomfortable in that moment. And so the body is doing a little stress relieving thing, um, stimming a bit to distract because that was an uncomfortable sensation. And so that's when I started really working on that. Okay, that rewinding tape thing, that works. That's good. Start to get a reaction and then, oh, that's what I was just thinking about. Um,
Okay.
so I highly recommend that.
Oh,
Um,
that's not a problem.
Good. And also, like I said, I mean, a lot of times, like you can also go, you know, like the earlier you can become aware that the impulse has started, the better.
Hmm.
If you're like 5 minutes into having been eating candy, it might be a
Right.
little bit harder to get back to what happened before you started. But
Yeah.
the sooner the impulse is, it's like I always say people when I used to have panic attacks, it was the same thing that you would notice after the panic attack happened that a panic attack was going to happen. And then it would gradually become more and more aware at the beginning of the panic attack and just before the panic attack started. So you start to become more aware of the subtle signs to where the first increase in heart rate or the first change in breathing becomes the awareness that, ooh, that would normally spiral into a panic attack, and I can just pause now and take a breath, and the panic attack doesn't have to happen. So it's that sort of thing that we're slowly becoming more and more aware in our life of what is happening all the time. And the more we can bring awareness to those times that are either if we're somebody that suffers with panic attacks or something to the specific instances of those panic attacks, if we're working with specific addictions or cravings to foods or things like that, the more we home in directly on those particular instances and we become aware at least in the space of time around it. So if it's a behavior that you're engaging in, start becoming aware as soon into the process of engaging with it as you possibly can. That, oh, I'm engaging in the behavior. Well, what am I feeling now? So at least in that moment, tune in to while you're engaging in the behavior, how are you feeling? And you might notice, oh, I'm feeling relaxed. Oh, I'm feeling a little bit happy. I'm feeling whatever. It might be positive, or it might still be negative. You might still be noticing, oh, I'm actually feeling kind of sad. I'm feeling a bit guilty. Feel whatever it is, become aware of it while you're in the process of enjoying whatever the thing is that you are engaging with. And then gradually keeping that awareness, you'll start to remember earlier and earlier into the process of engaging to check in and be aware of what's going on in the body, what's going on emotionally, what was going on in the mind. And then again, bringing that more and more throughout the day. And the other part of that is, I think, just as a general overall practice for everybody, the more we can be mindful in daily life, the better. It's just, you know, basic Buddhism 101, but
Hmm.
mindfulness helps. And the more we're mindful, the more we are aware of what is going on in the thoughts. Doesn't mean thoughts aren't happening, but the more we're aware that thinking is happening and that emotional reactions are happening to those thoughts. And we just become aware of what is happening. And then it becomes much easier to realize right now there's a thought train going on about, something sad in my life right now. And oh, look at that, right on cue. Here's the suggestive thought saying that there's hard candy over there. That might be a good distraction. And you can be aware in real time of this play taking place of one thought happening, another thought responding to that thought with a suggestion for something, a feeling of mobilization in the body that feels like you're going to get ready to go out and get the candy. You can be aware of all of that as it's happening. And then that is, and I mean, even do it a few times and let the whole process play out so you can mindfully be aware of the entire the entire movement of thought to move to immobilization to walking across the room to getting it to how it feels as you're getting closer to putting it in the mouth
Ah,
to how it feels to have it in the mouth, to how it feels afterwards. What is it changing with its introduction into the mouth that wasn't there before you put it in the mouth? What, all of those things, be mindful of the entire process and see what is the candy actually doing for you? What was the promise of what the candy was going to do for you? Did it actually succeed in fulfilling that promise or not? And
mhm.
could you get there without the candy? Was the candy just an unnecessary middleman to, emotional regulation?
Ah, okay.
And and none of that can we find out if we're not being mindful about our life.
Right.
So,
Um, so I noticed that there was nothing in there, and this is fine. It's not, it's just merely a question. There's
yeah.
nothing in there about at the moment of initiation in terms of making making a decision, as it were,
Mhm.
that um, we're paying attention to. Um, I'm trying to think of how you've said this before. You've talked about, when making the decision to say, you know, get additional caffeine later in the day,
Yeah.
when you're actually standing there about to grab a can of it or something that, you know, and there's the two impulses, and paying attention to the one that's saying yes and the one that's saying no, and what's going on in the body when that's happening. um, I noticed that we're not really going there in this case, which is fine. um,
Mm.
does that where I'm sure this is really the question, but where where does that fit into this, if it does?
Yeah. I mean, again, we have so many different ways of going about working with cravings and aversions because we have so many different types and they're caused by so many different
Yeah.
things. If you have, for instance, long-standing addiction issues with substances, that's going to be a different kind of practice probably than just um, candy. Like a
Yeah.
new habit of candy, addiction or whatever. And also the foundation is probably the same, right? We tend to use addictions as distraction mechanisms, no matter what they are. There's usually something emotionally or physically or psychologically, that we are avoiding. And then we get into these kind of avoidant behaviors by distracting ourselves with something. And some of those become metabolically addictive or psychologically addictive or something else. And depending on what it is, it's useful to have different tools and to look into different aspects of it. Um,
I
I
see.
think I think for this one, it's perfect because it's such a kind of a habit of craving or whatever with the candy. And it's one, like I said, it's not like really heavily addictive in a way that need to be weaned off or something. It's like it's just sugar,
Right.
but it's fulfilling a purpose. And it is important to notice what that purpose is. And
Right.
in this case, it's not so much about fighting against it or being curious about, why I want it versus why I don't want it or anything like that. It's really just about seeing the mechanism of what is it actually trying to do for you? What is the supposed benefit of having that candy right now? And is it actually functioning? Does it work?
Hmm.
Like I said, can you get to that point without it? It might just be that you need to acknowledge those emotions that are there and find
Ah,
equanimity with the emotions of being lonely and uncomfortable and sad and whatever else you might be experiencing in that moment. It's just something that needs to be acknowledged. And you can sit there and you can feel it And you can realize that that candy is not actually helping you come to terms with anything. That candy is just distracting you for a few minutes from those feelings, which probably, if you're paying attention, come back very shortly after the candy has dissolved.
I would
Uh,
expect so.
and so then it's not really about the candy. And it was never about the candy. It's not really about most of our addictions, which is why people who have addictive personalities often tend to go from alcohol to gambling to sugar to porn to one thing after another, because it's not really about the substance as much as it is about what the distraction is providing. Until you deal with whatever that undercurrent is, or your ability to, be equanimous with emotional insecurity and, whatever turbulent thoughts and emotions come up, then you're always going to be reaching out for something. And it's, again, it's not a fault, it's not a problem, but it's what we're doing.
Right.
So it it's like a double-sided thing. There's the kind of therapy side where it really helps because a lot of this is usually driven by some, unprocessed trauma or unconscious whatever. But on the other side, there's also that building up of equanimity that we are all going to have emotions that are uncomfortable and we are all going to have experiences that are uncomfortable. And the question is, can you get into a situation which is emotionally or physically or, psychologically uncomfortable and not have to reach out for a distraction, but simply be equanimous with it in its most bare, raw, uncomfortable way that it shows up.
I mentioned earlier that I had realized that there was this somewhat subtle or it was not an intense or overwhelming sort of resistance. It wasn't I wasn't putting up a huge fight, but there's definitely resistance to all of those feelings of abandonment and neglect. And I realized, okay, I'm doing this, but this is going to keep coming up. So resisting it is not helping in any way at all. And that was when it was possible to drop that resistance. But it makes me wonder if there's still resistance there that I'm not seeing, and that this is tied into that.
Yeah, there's
Because,
often so much resistance, just
well,
gradual
because
layers of,
that's interesting to know.
you
Well,
know,
the that question comes up in response to what you're saying, but also there's this awareness of the fact that I still have questions. Like the other day, um, it came up. I forget how, but in one way or another, the question showed up about that. All of the abandonment, neglect was. How long does this Fetter 2 type stuff keep coming up? When does it ever get to a point where it's either it stops coming up, which I don't think is very likely, or ceases to be an issue? And that question to me was very telling in light of everything you've just said. And yeah, so see there, that's just another form of resistance.
it is.
When does this stop being a problem? Hmm.
And that's exactly it. It stops being a problem when it stops being a problem, not when it goes away, just when it stops
Right.
being a problem.
Well, and that was a good step, a good solid step put on that road when, on some level, even if it's no matter how incomplete it might be, that there was this um, there was this part of me that was saying, okay, I'm just gonna let it be here when it shows up. I'm gonna quit trying to ignore it or put it aside, um, or wish it weren't there. Okay, we're just going to let it be here. We're going to let it have space. However incomplete that is, and it obviously is incomplete now, after everything that has just been said, still, I mean, that's definitely a very good step in the right direction.
Yeah.
So it's just a
Yeah,
matter of
absolutely.
continuing to make those steps until it's a
Absolutely.
case of, okay, you're here. I don't need anything to make this better. I don't need it
Yep.
to go away. It's here for as long as it's here, and when it's done, it'll be done and it'll go away. And until that day, this
Exactly.
is how it is.
Exactly. And I think a part of it is, like I just said, the learning to be equanimous with whatever emotions. make it so there's no problem when those things come up. It's just here. The irony is the more uh, we see it as a Fetter 2 problem or,
Uh,
a trauma thing, the more personal it is, the more of an issue it is because we are vilifying it and wanting it to go away and seeing it as a problem that needs to go. And I don't want this emotional turbulence or instability or whatever it is.
right.
The more we do that, the more entrenched it ends up becoming, and the more we're constantly in resistance to it and fighting it when it shows up, as opposed to really working on the side of it where it's okay that if crying comes up, if guilt comes up, if fear comes up, if any of these different emotions come up, I can just be present with it. So much of what we do with reparenting and that sort of thing, it puts us in that position where we are feeling what's there, but also having that higher perspective where we're feeling it, but we're also not personally affected by it. We're aware of it while still being slightly acted from it.
Hmm.
And what we're doing is really working on being able to recognize that these things are happening, but that they're also impersonal, that they are just, biology and conditioning at play. They come through. It's like the weather.
Hmm.
We allow it to come through. We acknowledge it. You can go into a deep despair every time we have a thunderstorm or a rainstorm, but it's not really solving anything. It doesn't actually affect the weather. It just makes you miserable and you suffer when it comes and then you feel better when it goes away. So we can do the same thing with the emotional turmoil, you know, recognize that in the past you have had issues of feeling less than, of feeling like the bad guy, and all of those feeling abandoned, and all of those things that have come out,
Feeling like the scapegoat.
feeling like the scapegoat. And every time that shows up, instead of wondering how long it's going to take until you stop feeling it, just recognize that this is one of those weather patterns that has moved through. It's predictable, right? When we talk about like I accept this or I expect this, I accept this, it's
Hmm.
predictable. You know that it is a conditioned pattern that you've had in the past. Certain things are likely to push that button and trigger that reaction. Just like when high pressure cells and low pressure cells in the atmosphere react, come into contact, certain types of weather systems are most likely going to occur. When you are in a situation where what you interpret as somebody abandoning you or leaving you or blaming you for something that you didn't do, even if they're somewhat abstract and not even fully evidenced by what's there, if there has any relationship to that, there's a good chance that that button is going to be pushed and you're going to feel those cascades of emotions and sensations in the body.
Ah,
So instead of taking that as a problem that you need to fix so that button stops being pushed anymore, let's work instead on the equanimous side where you realize that this
yeah.
is just an impersonal weather pattern that's moving through. And can you be okay with feeling this emotional turbulence that passes through without resisting it, without making it into something else, without making it personal? Just recognizing this is due to the conditioning of this particular biological being in this particular environment in which it was raised. It now has this um, pattern of behavior, which is noticeable. And like we talked about that last time, you can use the every time one of those comes up, you can say, I expect this because you can, right?
Mhm.
If a scapegoating issue comes up, you're probably reliably going to feel those same scapegoating sensations and emotions. So I expect this. You've been at it long enough, it's an expectable reaction. I expect this. And then the question is, can you also accept it? Can you accept that that is happening right now? And this is what it feels like in the body. And this is what thoughts come up in the mind. And you don't have to believe those thoughts. Again, having that wise witness or above it can be really helpful during all of this because we don't want to be completely my wise awareness of what's happening, but also the ability to really feel that, whatever the body is going through and whatever is being thrown at it, and I can accept that. It's temporary. It's something that's happened before and you've weathered it fine. So I expect that it's going to happen and I accept that it's happening again. And it's happening and it's happening. Okay, it stopped happening. I can accept that it has stopped happening now.
I thought you were about to say something.
Yeah, no, I think that's does that make sense? Does
Oh
that
yeah,
right?
absolutely,
Okay.
it does. But it raised a question,
Yeah.
and we kind of touched on the first part of it earlier about, kind of cultivating that meta awareness or the wise witness.
Mm,
Um, but since it's come up now twice, it seemed like
mhm,
it might be a good idea to, in a simple way, if possible, to talk about how to cultivate that, and
yeah.
if it's possible, how to deepen that that type
Yeah.
of awareness.
Yeah. I mean, the foundational way is all of the mindfulness meditations that have been out for years. That's really what, for millennia, that's really what they're doing is cultivating that when you're sitting watching your breath, or when you're sitting watching thoughts, or when you're sitting watching anything, what you're doing is developing that ironically dualistic sense of the one that is, aware, the one that is watching. And when we start doing that with thoughts, that's when we really start to accelerate that the sort of, deepening polarization between having once felt synonymous with every thought that I have, and now realizing that there's this kind of secondary awareness, which is aware of those thoughts. And that's really where we start to develop the metacognitive awareness. Also, bodily sensations, going from feeling completely synonymous with every emotion we have and every pain we have and all of that, to can we recognize the pain in the body or the itch in the body or the emotion in the body and recognize it, still feel it. We're not dissociating from it and just, popping out of the body so we don't feel anything and we're in a limbo state. We fully feel, but we're cultivating that sense of I'm noticing it, but it's not entirely mine. I'm not identified with it. I'm just aware of it. Like I can be aware of the tree out there. I'm aware of it, but I'm not, you know, synonymous with that tree at this moment, right? There's an awareness of it that's separate, ironically, from uh, the actual happening. And all of our mindfulness practices, when we are being aware specifically of the interoceptive stuff in the body and the thoughts that are going on in the mind, are really deepening that practice to create. I have a belief. I see something that I think is a certain way, and then you have that other level of yeah, but I'm are we sure that this belief is trustworthy? Are we sure that this emotion really is as overwhelming as we thought it was? It's stepping out to have that bit of space, and that we really develop by all of the traditional samatha and inquiry practices and um, um, actually I think the like see hear feel and those kind of labeling practices are so powerful for that too because you're intentionally recognizing what you see, what you smell, what you taste, what you feel, what you think, and all of those senses. But that in itself is proving that, it's kind of a secondary thing. It's not mine. It's not identified with. It is an awareness that it is a process that's going on. It's an awareness that there's some appearance there, but it's not me. And I think the more it's just really a matter of the more we do of these things and the more we drag it into our daily experience. That's why I'm always telling people, uh, or recommending, not so much telling, but recommending that they don't confine their practice to sitting on a cushion a couple times a day. It's really about bringing it into having that mindful, well observed life, no matter what we're doing, and that is what helps create that metacognitive awareness.
Um, Something that, going back to what you were saying just a moment ago, something that I heard somebody once say that really helped me with understanding doing things like see, hear, feel, or watching thoughts or any of it
Yeah,
was trying to remember how he put it exactly. If I can see it, it's not me.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. It sets up that instant dichotomy, and it is funny that we do so much dualistic practice to get to the point of non-duality. but
Kind of makes you
but
wonder if it's maybe there's not a better approach somewhere. I mean,
I
maybe
know,
maybe we should be wary of those things.
I know, but it is functional. It does for most of us help where because I think the irony is we start with a very uh, non-dualistic view of the self, right? When we're growing up and into adulthood, we have, for those of us who aren't on any sort of a, Buddhist or Advaita or non-dual path, um, we have a dualistic view of me versus the world, but we have a very non-dualistic view of what it is to be me. This is all
Hmm.
one unified thing. If I cut my finger off, I have lost a part of me. That is my
Uh,
finger in a jar over there. Every thought I have is my thought. Every word that I write is my word that comes from me and is a reflection of me as this unified creation. And when I die, I am going to be whatever the belief system happens to be, but that exists in some way that is indefinable, and or I mean, in inseparable, in
Indivisible.
indivisible. Thank you. Indefinable was not the right word. Indivisible was. Thanks. So it's something that feels like it's indivisible, which is ironically, it's dualistic in terms of me versus you, but it's very non-dualistic in terms of the unity of the thing. When we're doing the kind of non-dualistic, I mean, the sort of dualistic seeming meditation practices, ironically, we are separating out that kind of non-dual experience of being a unified me into all of its
Hmm.
constituent parts so that we can see that that was an illusion. And the odd byproduct of that is that we can have experiences that start to feel like my separation between you is just as much of an illusion as my creation of this finger and this thought being elided together into one unified thing. It we start to kind of break down the entire belief system of duality versus non-duality by virtue of seeing what we thought was a non-dual creation of a me is actually a whole multiplistic experience of various thoughts and biochemical reactions and atoms and bacteria in the gut and throughout the body and microorganisms and all of this that actually create this seemingly unified experience of one Toddness. And then that can break down, and then we can have these bigger experiences of greater non-duality. But it is funny that it's like playing with like nested duality.
that that's one of those things that it um when you say nested duality, it almost kind of gently recoil from the rabbit hole like quality of that.
But again, it's like, don't make like a whole thing out of that. It's just that
Huh.
it's all processing, right? It's all pointing to the illusory nature of our processing of our experience.
Hmm.
We have ways in which we create duality, and we have ways in which we experience and create non-duality or non-dualistic experiences. None of those are inherently true or real. They are
Hmm.
they are both variations of experiences which are in any number of ways available to us. Some by meditation, some by psychedelic enhancements, some by, therapy, some by spontaneous experiences. Um, they're on the menu of potential experiences, but also it's created by the same thing that is creating the dualistic version that we normally adhere to all day. And again, it's like it's just in the lens of how we look at it. That if we look at the experience of the typical person who has never done any of this practice, they probably have a very dualistic view on the sort of greater scale, but a very non-dualistic view of the existence of their, eternal being, of however they experience that. But it's just within their processing of that. That's their experience of it, which is subject to change in any number of ways. Um, and the same with, I think it's a problem that we have in the spiritual community and the non-dual community of making the external sort of, more grand non-dual experience into the truth then, because that feels bigger and better and more real than the, smaller, more suffering filled dualistic view of me versus you and me versus the tree and me versus everything else. They're experiences that we have, but as soon as we lock into the belief that one of those is actually valid and true on a grand sense and the other one isn't, we're just right back into the same cesspool of belief and thought that we were in from the beginning. So, yeah, yeah, yeah. It is a quagmire as long as belief and thoughts and distinctions about it and trying to put things into boxes in our very human way is at play, because that the mind is always going to create levels upon levels and um conflicts and discrepancies and all of these different things, because the mind is creating all of the boxes.
I guess maybe that's why I had that reaction because it
Yeah.
did feel kind of confining when the way it usually feels and when it's conceptualized is that map that Douglas Harding did, starting from the smallest to the
Yeah.
largest.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really more how it seems. I mean, there doesn't really seem to be um, less and less as time goes by, there's less of that distinction between in here and out there. It's all
Yeah.
just one sort of grand scale.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. And even that can be a perceptual shift, which I think there are, reasons to also think that there's a certain truth to that. I mean, clearly we are part of this whole grand mechanism of the universe. We're not
Mhm.
separate from any of it in any way, shape, or means. So there's absolutely a, discernible truth to that, as we can see. Just like, and that's what, like at the beginning we said, some thoughts are more true, or valid, or have some more utility on a daily basis than others. And I think
Right,
that's one that has, it's helpful to bear in mind, but it's also helpful to not get caught up into anything as being the ultimate truth or belief that we're locked in with.
right.
Ambiguity is our friend in this work.
I'm okay with that. It's just a matter of hopefully as time continues to go by, those sorts of limiting ways of seeing things become less habitual,
Yeah,
because they're ingrained from day one, you
yeah,
know. So
absolutely.
I mean, it certainly feels less real, solid, and fixed than it did, say, 2 years ago. But
Yeah,
at the same time, it can still rear its head and become kind of the operating system framework for, say, interactions with people where there might be some strife or difficulty,
yep.
you know. So
Yeah,
anyway,
it's a process. It's a very long and winding process. All right.
well, 2 weeks.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. I'll talk to you then.
Yep. Have a good couple weeks. Good luck with everything. Keep me posted.
Thanks. Will do.
Okay.
I'll talk to you
All
soon.
right. Yep.
Bye.
Bye.